Hey, Geekscapists, welcome to a brand new Geekscape podcast. I'm Jonathan London, your host. And if this is your first Geekscape, you know what to do because you downloaded a podcast named Geekscape. Chances are you're going to get some geek conversation. You're poking around on the wrong side of your podcatcher. Maybe we were recommended to you by something else. If you're watching on Facebook, Twitch, or YouTube, well, you were watching some geeky content and somebody was like, you might like Geekscape. Same thing with the podcasts. It was like you were probably on your podcatcher listening to something Geekscape adjacent. Maybe it was one of the other shows on the Geekscape network. We have lots of them. And somebody said, why don't you listen to the OG Geekscape? Started it all. We've been around for a bit. We've been bringing you conversations with filmmakers, video game creators, actors, writers, all sorts of stuff across the pop culture spectrum. And this episode is no different, except it is our Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 special. So Ian Kerner is waiting in the wings. He's definitely on our Guardians squad. He's been here since the beginning. And we're going to be talking Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So if you've not seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and you're watching or listening to this, please turn it off. I'm not going to be offended. Don't delete it. Put like a tab or something and be like, I'm going to come back to this after I watched Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Once you watch it, once you know what happens, you can come back and you can listen to this. You have my permission. But if you haven't watched Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and you're listening to my words right now, we're going to spoil the heck out of it. That's what Ian and I do. We've been doing it since the beginning. And let's see. We got Ralph Oppel over there saying it's rough sitting through 2.5 hours of sad tenseness. That's how he describes Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is 2.5 hours of sad tenseness. I think the word is that the word? Is that a word? I don't know. I don't think tenseness is a word. I think you're looking for tension. Tenseness though. Like, all right, well, Geekscape is we can only educate you in the pop culture stuff. However you learned before you got here, maybe you learned words like tenseness. I can't help you, but whatever you bring to the table, you're in our hands now. And Ian and I are going to talk to you about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and you'll learn a whole lot more there. All right, so strap yourselves in, and let's give it a go. I hope, if I delay anymore, you guys are just going to be riddled with tenseness. So we'll be right back. All right, Geekscape, here we are, and you can cut the tenseness with a knife. You can cut the tenseness with a knife, and I say that because Ralph Oppel is back in the comments on YouTube, and he says, I just looked it up. It is a word, and I am the smartest man alive. Well, I'll tell you what, Ralph, you're watching Geekscape live on YouTube, so I got to tell you, like, you make great decisions already. You're probably the smartest man in my world, but you're not alone because I try and surround myself. When you got what I got, which isn't a whole lot, I try and surround myself with smart people. One of them is sitting right here, Mr. Ian Kerner. We're going to be talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So again, I'm just going to warn you, if you have not seen this movie, we're going to spoil the heck out of it. But here he is, Mr. Ian Kerner, talk Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Mr. Ian Kerner, how are you? How's your tenseness? How's your tenseness? You need a massage? Something?
Yeah, I could use a massage.
You ever heard that word, tenseness? You've heard that before, tenseness? So. Or it's tension, right?
Yeah. Tension, I think it should be that. Yeah, tenseness. Yeah, tension.
I'm going to go with tension. Tenseness, you know what? You can do tenseness. I'm okay with standing corrected. It's nothing life hasn't already done a million times over before we got to this episode. Okay, let's talk Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in the Geekscape. That's the last spoiler warning right now that I'm going to give you. Ian and I actually have not talked about this movie. I had to race out to an album release show for my last Geekscape guest, Josie Cotton, immediately.
Oh, I thought you were
after
going to the
credits
bathroom.
rolled.
You ran out so quick.
No, I had to get to an album release party that I promoted last Geekscape, and I raced out of there. So we didn't talk at all. Interesting to know. I mean, I think I know what you think, but Ian, it's our final hurrah with this current set of Guardians. It's Guardians Volume 3.
What do you think I think?
I think you really enjoyed it.
I did. It's true.
I thought you really enjoyed it because every now and then I would look over and you'd be hopping up and down in your chair. And I was like, excuse me, can somebody
Honestly,
come and
I thought it was
make sure?
great.
Yeah.
You know, I felt that a friend of mine had a criticism. It's a long movie. It's almost 2.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think I do agree that there's probably in the middle, it maybe slows down a little bit, but it didn't really bother me. The characters are great. I think it pays off. It's an arc for every single one of these characters. You know, there's so many great moments. It has a lot of heart. I mean, I teared up twice in this movie at different times. You know, I really, really, really enjoyed the movie. I've had people saying Marvel's back. I mean, you know, like, because let's be honest, we've been real disappointed for several Marvel movies now. Yeah. Movies that should not have been disappointing were disappointing. You know, I mean, looking at Thor and Doctor Strange 2, like both of those movies should not have been the disappointments that they were.
But Ant-Man should. But Ant-Man.
I liked Ant-Man, but I didn't love Ant-Man. So same thing.
You didn't like it. You didn't like Thor: Love and Thunder or Doctor Strange 2 at all.
There are things I liked about both movies, but they were both disappointments.
Sure. I actually think I like Doctor Strange quite a bit. But sure. Okay. This movie.
Doctor Strange is, listen, I've said this before, it was a retread of WandaVision for no reason. I mean, we don't need to get into that review. We can go look up that review. But
we reviewed all these on the feed.
Yeah.
I think
Ian, this movie, you know exactly what they were doing. Yep. And it paid off so many things. Particularly the end, I never expected that they would bring Star-Lord where they did, but it makes perfect sense going back to the beginning. And then when you see the second movie, you know, and he finds out, you know, what really happened to him and all that, but he still never really goes back and reconciles, you know? Mm-hmm. It was, I mean, that was just really well done for me. A really unexpected character arc for Drax.
He becomes a father again.
Yeah, Mantis, I mean, all of it, every one of them, even Gamora, which, you know, I found myself thinking, because, you know, obviously James Gunn had an idea. He always said it was a trilogy. And then you have the Avengers movies, and they do what they do with her. So would this have been his plan? You know, it feels like that would have been deviation, right?
To have Gamora, Gamora he established in the first two movies die in Endgame. Or in Infinity War, and then have
Infinity War, and she comes back, and now she's not really with them, and she has her own thing going on.
I think it fits great.
I think he probably intended something slightly different, but Quill would still have gone where he went. I do think that, you know, in the one sense, I like that they didn't try to quickly just put them back together so simply, and she's found this other life. But there's potential, so maybe they do end up together again down the line, you know?
Mm-hmm. The last title card is Star-Lord will return. And so whether or not he's a member of a Guardians team, I find that unlikely. But, you know, there's so much space.
I think that's the point.
He's also on Earth now, right? Well, he's on Earth, but they've also established so much of the spacefaring aspect of the Marvel universe. So we got the Marvels coming out in November. There's a couple of characters in this movie that might pop up in the Marvels. And who knows what we'll see Star-Lord
in the end credit means they have something specific with him in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the Guardians returning, listen, I'm sure that team probably pops up in one of the big Avengers movies, you know, while they are not necessarily thinking to make a movie built around that new team.
No, the big Avengers movies, I don't think Avengers movies can be small anymore. And we've got two Avengers movies on the docket. So I think
they're huge.
We have Peter and possibly some form of this Guardians team on there.
Right.
If not, some of the Guardians that no longer are on the team.
Right. I'm just saying Peter's on Earth, so he can pop up in so many other places.
Okay, so Ian, let's start just talking about the movie that we got. I mean, post Christmas special, the Guardians are on charge of nowhere. They got
I
a
was
community
so
there.
disappointed in that special, as you know.
I love that special. Why were you disappointed in it? It's just fun flavoring. It's not.
It
It's
was
not.
it was
Like
slow.
an appetizer, buddy. You
But it
can't
was
see it.
slow.
It was fun. It was hilarious. It was Drax and Mantis having fun on Earth, and it was silly. And come on, man, it wasn't going to be Endgame.
It was silly. Yes.
What did you want? All right, you wanted like a major cornerstone of the Marvel universe.
I wanted it to be better.
Oh, I thought I think that the whole Kevin Bacon Christmas special was a lot of fun. It is an appetizer to the meal that we got here, and I agree with you 100%. I love this movie. I thought it was great, and Andy Rattinger, my good buddy, who he said, you know why I think this works, and the other movies didn't necessarily get there. The ones that you're talking about, it's very personal. This movie is incredibly personal. And he's not afraid to shy away from the horrific things being done to people that we've personally invested in.
Yes, but that's the problem with Doctor Strange, is that you could see that there were the bones for a lot of character stuff there. And instead of really doubling down on that, they just kept throwing the same action sequences over and over again. It was like the same shit.
Yeah, we got a roller coaster with Doctor Strange. I thought it was a lot of fun. It was cool seeing different aspects of the Marvel Universe. I know we only see like 2 or 3 other realities, but I thought Doctor Strange was fun. This movie is not just fun, but it feels incredibly substantial. And if 2.5 hours is required to do that, good. Let's start with the beginning, because we do have those Guardians on Nowhere starting their own community. Obviously, Peter is completely depressed because Gamora, for the most part, is dead to him. She's cast him out. He doesn't know this yet, but she's joined the Ravagers, which is the original Guardians. But then you get Adam Warlock showing up and just start pummeling it. Who's Adam Warlock?
One second. So, because there was one thing about the movie, and a friend of mine and I discussed this, that bugs me a bit.
Okay.
And since we're starting at the beginning with Peter, and at the beginning I buy it, but no helmet and no rocket boots.
In the helmet and rocket boots would have been huge at the end of this movie.
And the middle, late in the movie, right? Like, jumping out the thing. So it's like, I get that plot-wise, you don't want to have them for you to do the things that you do, but was it cut somewhere? Because it doesn't make sense. He doesn't have them.
No,
now,
they should have been destroyed.
When he's drunk and Adam Warlock attacks, he's not wearing this stuff. And maybe, something happened. But once he's like suiting up and all that, like, where's his shit?
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I read that a few different places. That he should have had the helmet there at the end. He should have had the rocket pack at the end, or at least on Counter Earth. This is a character that flies, and there's a character that flies in space. Where's his space stuff when he goes out into space? At least the sequence where it's destroyed, discarded. Maybe the Adam Warlock fight would have been a great place to destroy it.
Once he's suiting up in his stuff, he should have had it.
Yeah, show it. Ian, can you explain the Adam Warlock stuff to us? And is this a version of Adam Warlock that is loyal to the comics or not?
Somewhat. So Adam Warlock in the comics is an artificial being that was created by human scientists, the Enclave. And he's originally known as him because he sort of takes off from his creators right away and never really even had a name. I thought what they do really well in the MCU that they've been doing from the beginning is a lot of the time, and we've seen this with movie names, we've seen this with a lot of things. They take an idea that's based in the comics somewhat, and they put their own spin on it. And sometimes what they do is they take a couple of concepts that are similar, okay, and they put them together. So, because listen, comics, you've had comics for, so many decades and different creators, and a lot of the time you'll have this very similar idea, okay? And for instance, you have, in the comics, you have something called Half-World, okay, where these robots who were caring for humans and animals too, and they ended up like experimenting on animals. And that's where Rocket came from in the comics. But you also have the High Evolutionary in the comics, and he actually experimented on different beings, and he created like his Animan, okay? Mm-hmm. So the idea of taking those two things and putting it together is really clever to me. Similarly, you have something like the Enclave, who was like, they were experimenting on creating life. So again, you have the High Evolutionary. So here's the third concept. We saw the Sovereign in the second movie. So now we find out the High Evolutionary, he created the Sovereign, created the Animan, he created Rocket and those things. Obviously the Sovereign, and Adam Warlock is part of the Sovereign experiment. So he's done all these different things.
And what are the Sovereign in the comics? I'm sorry to interrupt, Ian, but the Sovereign in the comics, we probably discussed this during Guardians Volume 2, but they actually play a big role in this one, at least the first part of the movie, to establish Adam Warlock. Now you realize they don't just work for themselves, aren't just these people out there, but they work for the High Evolutionary.
Another being the High Evolutionary, but
they're from the comics.
Thing is, I don't recall the Sovereign actually being in the comics. It's just something that was made up for that. But here's my point: is this? Some people might argue, well, why is one guy making all these things, right? Because at a certain point, you start going like, oh, that seems a little silly. And it actually, in the real world, it actually makes sense.
Yeah,
that you would have things like different scientists, maybe, oh, I have an idea for this thing. Well, I want to do my own version. We see this all the time. Like different scientists are working on things and they come up with different versions of stuff. But in terms of a movie, if someone's already done something, a certain kind of thing in a Marvel movie, they're not going to do another Marvel movie with something that's similar, right? Because that's repetitive, right? So it actually, for me, makes a lot of sense. They took all these different concepts that were done by totally different creators at different points in history in Marvel Comics, and they sort of smashed them together. The same guy did all these things, just because from a movie standpoint, this is Marvel taking their shot at that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It in an odd way, it almost makes everything seem smaller, the universe, but it makes sense for me because you're not going to go back to that well, right?
No, it's the same beat repeated.
Yeah, so they're not going to like to do it again, even though if we saw that in another Marvel movie, we'd be like, well, then they already do this. Truth is, but in the real world, that's nothing wrong with that.
And in comics, these beats repeat all the time. In comics, you constantly have these. I think the generations in comic are like, somebody told me, like 6 to 8 years. You have to retell these stories for a new generation of kids who picked up the comics. Well,
there's that argument, but I'm just saying, like, even in the real world, like, scientists come up with something, and another scientist or another company makes their own version of something. It's different, but it's similar, or it's of the same kind of thing, and that's okay. And in comics, a different hero fights a different group doing the same thing. Maybe Spider-Man fights 2 different artificially made beings. It doesn't mean, oh, well, hey, did you speak to the other guy that made that? It doesn't mean anything. Maybe they based on the same science. Maybe they didn't. But by the way, Spider-Man comes. Sometimes that's what happens. Is someone else finds, a hideout of something, and he paints the costume, and now he's the Hobgoblin, because he found an old Green Goblin thing. That happens. That makes sense.
With Adam Warlock, though, this didn't feel like a familiar version of Adam Warlock from the comics.
Well, I had a lot of people said that to me. And here's the thing. I think a lot of people, probably you included in that, think of your familiar version of that Infinity Gauntlet era on. But Adam Warlock and the character him had been around for a long time. And him initially is not the super smart tactician Adam Warlock. Okay, so this actually felt very much like a proto Adam Warlock, the him version of Adam Warlock for me.
Where he's a blank slate.
He's a blank slate. He's confused, doesn't really know, he's just going with it, lashing out. That didn't, for me, didn't feel, it's not the Adam Warlock that we mostly think of, because for so long, what ended up happening is Adam Warlock kept evolving, and he gets the soul gem, and that gives him even more abilities. And you start getting, there's some deep history Adam Warlock storylines. This whole thing with the Magus, which is his evil version. If anything, the Sovereign seemed to me very similar to the followers of the Magus. And that's where I thought they were going to go with that, which is this potential future timeline evil version of Adam Warlock, who basically manipulates time to kind of create himself. It's very confusing. So like Adam Warlock's biggest villain really is himself gone bad.
Because you already don't have Thanos in the MCU
Yes,
anymore.
And he has all these followers. So the Sovereign, to me, felt like it was going to be this religious thing, and that's very much the Magus.
Okay.
And it gets into all this stuff about belief, and he gets more powerful when he has more believers and all this stuff. Ultimately, they use the Magus storyline to bring the Guardians of the Galaxy in the comics. The original Guardians of the Galaxy actually come from the 30th century. It's very much Marvel's Legion of Superheroes.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. It sounds like DC's Legion of Superheroes.
But then they ended up bringing him into the present. They jumped back and forth a number of times. They had like, so one of their characters, Vance Astro, is actually, you end up finding out that he's actually from the 20th century, and he's Vance Astrovic, who was a mutant, who ends up in like a special suit that, you know, preserves him and spends an animation. And in the 30th century, where they're fighting for, you know, human liberation from the Badoon, he actually has Captain America's shield, and he's a telekinetic, because Captain America's shield, of course, is going to survive anything because it's indestructible. So, but that's where the Guardians started. And they did a storyline where they came into the present, and then they inspired a group of cosmic heroes, of which, you know, and that's Rocket and Groot and Star-Lord, and, you know, Adam Warlock has worked with them, Gamora. So Gamora as a character was around long before Guardians of the Galaxy in the present. Okay, she
as was Groot.
I
mean, Groot was one of the monsters, right?
Yes. But Gamora worked with Adam Warlock, and Pip the Troll, who we saw in the tag in Eternals, was also a major Adam Warlock related character.
That stuff just got reprinted in Geekscape. Like, there's a Adam Warlock book that just got reprinted from. I think it's that storyline, and Marvel's been doing some good stuff, republishing some of the topical storylines. That one with Pip the Troll and Gamora and Adam Warlock just got reprinted, as well as this one I'm holding up for camera. If you're watching on Facebook or Twitch or Twitter or Instagram, it's the not Instagram, YouTube. It's the Rock Raccoon, like Bill Mantlo origin stuff redone. It doesn't have the Hulk storyline that he's actually introduced in, but it does have the characters that you saw in this movie, the otter and the walrus. But just letting Geekscape know that stuff is still on the stand.
They had teased the Adam Warlock cocoon. Yeah, so they had teased the Adam Warlock cocoon way before we got, you know, the culmination of the Infinity Stone saga.
No, we saw it in,
and we all figured, okay, that's that Warlock, because
Thor Dark World. We saw it in the tag of Thor Dark World.
The end
saw a cocoon in it. Yeah. The Collector has it.
We saw the cocoon, and so everyone, you know, we figured, okay, he has the cocoon, which would make sense because if it had come from the Enclave. But, you know, because in the Infinity Gauntlet comics, which is the original Infinity Gauntlet storyline, Adam Warlock is a major character. He's already been, you know, someone who fights Thanos a lot, and he ends up being the savior of everything. In essence, he ends up being the one that does what Tony does, because everyone gets wiped out and he brings them back. So comic book readers expected him a lot sooner. It almost seemed like, when you just got the hint of him, and you got the hint of him at the end of Guardians 2, and we were all wondering, are we going to get him in an Infinity War? We did not.
Yeah, because that came out before Infinity War. And we actually see the cocoon looking like a cocoon, not like the metallic thing that we saw at the end of Dark World.
Yes. So that's what we expected. It's not what we got. And that's, you know, I mean, listen, Infinity War was great. They did something different. They do things differently, but we still ultimately got Adam Warlock. And so, you know, I think they did an interesting character arc there, and they redeemed him. Yeah, you know, and I was wondering for the whole movie, where are they going to go with this? Because I went into that movie knowing that he's going to end up. This movie, yes.
Yeah, you know he's going to be on the Guardians team. I know he's going to be on the Guardians team at whatever the iteration is at the end of this movie, because you'd read a bunch going into this that this is what James says is like the last version of this Guardians team. We expect people to die, or at least some of them. It gets pretty close many times, and the movie is an emotional roller coaster. Heidi was crying every single time there was an animal on screen. And there's a lot of, I mean, this is a hard PG-13. Geekscape, you shouldn't be watching this or listening to this if you haven't seen it, but this is a dark movie. And I knew it was going to have body horror in it. The second I knew it was James Gunn and the High Evolutionary, and he was going to be experimenting on stuff. I love the High Evolutionary. He's one of my favorite villains. One of my, like, the comic that is important to me that really kept me in comics was picking up off of spinner rack at like a convenience store outside of New Braunfels, Texas, was the Evolutionary War Avengers Annual, where they're all strapped to the globe. You remember that cover where the High Evolutionary is holding the globe, and there's Grey Hulk, there's Hercules, there's US Agent, and they're all this weird Avengers team. But that was the Beast is on the team, and I loved that book as a kid. I loved that book. I still have that issue. It's all in tatters, but I still have it. And I've always loved the High Evolutionary. Seeing him go as dark, and he's always been creepy to me. He's always been weird, Frankensteining monsters, like animals and robotics and humans together. But seeing James Gunn do it, I kind of knew what was in store. I knew this movie was going to get dark. I knew it was going to get gross, and I knew it was going to play into his strengths, and he did it beautifully. And he did it personally. The whole Rocket stuff. Does Rocket have a kill switch in the comics? Does he, Ian?
I don't.
Does Rocket have a kill switch in the comics?
I don't think we've ever seen an actual. I've never seen an actual kill switch that I could think of in the comics with Rocket. But again, I thought. Listen, they brought this to life in a really great way. I love this idea that Rocket was so special. I thought that was really interesting, particularly for what the High Evolutionary wanted. I love that the face of Rocket really had fucked him up. I loved that. That was an amazing reveal for me.
That Rocket had destroyed
I thought
his
that
face.
the stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, I loved that. That.
What I liked about the High Evolutionary was he wasn't just cold. You know, usually in the comics, he's cold and he's a scientist. Yes. And if he has to destroy a planet to remake it and get it perfect, he'll do it. And it's a cold decision. In this one, you actually see the High Evolutionary drunk. You see the High Evolutionary almost Shakespearean in their own personal torture. And as much as he needs Rocket, because Rocket has the genius of invention, which none of his other, experiments have, he also has a very personal reason to want Rocket. I mean, Rocket took his face off. Like seeing the face at the end is crazy. The movie's beautiful. I think the movie's great on a personal level. Every character, including High Evolutionary, is tied personally to these characters. And they left him alive. I'd love to see him again somewhere. You didn't see him die on screen. You just saw him get his face ripped off on the screen. But
yeah, I feel like they probably killed him.
I think maybe this is the end, but I would love to see him again. All right, I mean, Ronan the Accuser is a character that I'd love to see again. There's a lot of Marvel characters I'd love to see again who have quote unquote died on screen.
Well, by the way, it seems like in the Marvels, where I felt that notwithstanding how much of it we got in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., we got Captain Marvel and we have Guardians, and then where the fuck the Kree been? So I don't know how excited I am for the Marvels, but at least we're getting a whole shitload of Kree in there. And you see someone who seems to have, Ronan's ultimate weapon, the hammer in that.
Hammer.
Seemingly an accuser,
Yeah, and I told you watching the movie.
Is it L'Oreal? I don't know.
We saw, I actually think Hulkling's in the freaking movie.
That would make sense, but I'm not sure.
I am looking forward to the Marvels. I'm really looking forward to the Marvels.
So by the way, so the Hulkling reference is a great way to bring up, an Easter egg in this movie, which is Children of Mar-Vell.
Is that where Phyla comes from?
Hulkling. So Phyla and Janice Vell are son and daughter of Mar-Vell that he didn't know about the genetic material taken. His girlfriend had them after he died.
In Geekscape, Phyla is in the movie. She's one of the girls. She's the little girl that's on the Guardians team at the end of the movie, the white-haired girl.
Right.
That's Phyla. You meet her on the.
They name her Phyla.
Yeah,
and she has two glowing gauntlets. And in the comics, Mar-Vell initially, later Janice and Phyla have all had these gauntlets.
Okay.
Negabands they're called, and they channel cosmic energy. So that was that Easter egg. That was Phyla Vell in that, or at least they just called it Phyla. Now, another kid of Mar-Vell is Hulkling, but that kid was Mar-Vell and the Empress of the Skrulls. So that kid is half Kree, half Skrull, and in the comics ends up being right now he's the Emperor of a united Kree-Skrull empire.
Mm-hmm. So in the Marvels, that's why I say the Marvels right on the corner and it's going cosmic. Phyla kind of is at least tangentially related to some of the events in that movie. I mean, she's more of a Captain Marvel character than she is a Guardians character.
Well, except that she's been a Guardian in recent years.
Right. Okay. So now she's on the Guardians team. What did you think? I mean, I love talking about the High Evolutionary. We can talk. What's the origin in the comics of the High Evolutionary? When did he first pop up?
1 second, by the way.
Okay,
Phyla
please.
in the comics, her long-term romantic partner is Moondragon, whose
Cool.
father in the comics is Drax.
Yeah. Okay. So it's all kind. So she is kind of connected.
She's Heather Douglas. He was Arthur Douglas. He thought that she was dead, and he died. Drax,
okay.
Arthur Douglas in the comics.
Okay, so tell me about
very connected.
Tell me about the first. You've been reading comics longer than me. When's the first time you saw
Evolutionary was a scientist from Earth from the 20th century who did a bunch of experimenting, eventually evolved himself, and went cosmic. Got very, very powerful. Tied in his experiments, his base of operations was Wondergore Mountain. You know, you start getting to stuff. So he had these Animen that his original experiments, his half animal, half human beings were actually at Wondergore Mountain in Transia. And
we saw Wondergore Mountain,
Bova
too, Geekscape.
We saw and we saw Bova, the cow woman. And in the comics, Bova was a midwife, and she actually birthed Pietro and Wanda.
Mm-hmm. So she was an anime.
So yes.
When did we see Bova?
Yes. Just seeing the cow-headed character in Doctor Strange seemingly is Bova, but we never actually see it. But visually, Wondergore Mountain, and that's Bova's, of all the anime, Bova's the one that's most known,
right?
Mostly because
and that's what he created. He created the Animen, and then of course we see a planet of Animen in this movie. We see a planet of Animen, which was kind of cool.
Well, that's the thing is, so he created Counter Earth in the comics, and the idea of Counter Earth is it's literally in orbit around the sun. It's directly counter to Earth.
Yeah, I was surprised they didn't go with something that was right next to the sun, because that's always been where Counter Earth was. Like, we can't see it, we don't know it's there, because the Earth, the sun's always been in between it. You know,
it's always just
and it's Earth. It's really what we got in the movie. It is an Earth built for the High Evolutionary and his experiments, which is what Disney World is here on Earth. So let's keep going. The Bill Manlow, Rocket Raccoon stuff. If you all pick up these comics, you're not really going to get too much that seems familiar with what was happening in the movie. This is very weird and very Disney-ish, the original Bill Mantlo stuff. And it's also very positive. What do you think Bill Mantlo would think watching his like Lila and his Walrus character and Rocket being treated so darkly in this movie?
I think he'd love Rocket. I think he'd love Rocket from the get-go, you know? Is it too dark? I mean, that's the thing, is he made those comics at a very different time. And they are a little bit kind of silly kitty, you know, about it, you know, for a bit. And they've gotten darker, sure, but I don't think he'd have a problem with it. You do?
Oh my God, it gets so dark. He just I mean, they are not the characters from this comic. The characters in this comic are innocent.
But dude, experimenting on animals that way. Is there any version of that in the real world that is anything but it's exactly what it is, right?
No, shampoo's
like,
probably the
Bill Mantlo did it like it's sort of seemingly fine, but you know, even in the comics, like Rocket's not happy about his memories of it.
Mm-hmm.
He does not. That's not a new idea. That did not start from James Gunn.
Right. And so
Ian,
so you've got this. First off, we got to talk about that one take in the fight sequence when they're taking on. That one take was amazing, and I know it's heavily CGI and heavily composited and all this, but I love that stuff. I love that it was in this movie, and I also like the stakes. What's that?
I also love that they sort of redid the with Groot with Star-Lord. They redid the Groot and Rocket shots, you know, like they coming around the camera. I don't know about you, for me, and I'd already seen, because the toy stuff's already out there, so I knew at some point you have Groot with all the different hands and shit. But the idea that he has all the weapons hidden inside him, and they scan and they don't find him, and just pops up and all these things come out.
I thought he was only gonna have two. I knew he was gonna hide Gunn.
But and also that this is a thing that this was like a no-brainer thing. They've done this. This is like a thing they've done. They know they can do. It wasn't a one-off. Groot knows exactly what to do, which is awesome. Because that's the thing you have to remember is Groot is like their kid. You know, Gunn has said, unlike in the comics, Baby Groot is just Groot. You know, he gets mostly destroyed. If one piece is left, he grows himself back again. Mm-hmm. In the movies, that's not what it is. Groot from the first movie died. He sacrificed himself, and the new Groot is his child.
Yeah.
That was raised by the Guardians. Like that's why they do that whole thing about the surly teenager thing, and they chew him out for mouth and everything else, language, all that stuff. Like it's their kid. But now it's like he's grown up into like a badass. He's grown up just doing this shit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he's built different than the other group was. Like he's muscular because it's what he's been doing his whole life,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know that Pete Davidson was one of those characters in that scene, right?
Yes,
SNL.
I did.
Pete Davidson.
Yes,
he
I
dropped
knew
by
that.
set. Obviously, he was in Suicide Squad, but they're friends. He dropped by for a day, and they put a mask on him. And he played one of those characters.
Yeah, there's so many characters. There's so many actors. I mean, I was surprised that they had Nathan Fillion do a character that was not like a named character, but they'd already had him. That little Easter egg of him as Wonder Man.
Mm-hmm.
Which of course isn't happening now because they went a different way for the show that they're going to do. So I thought that was pretty cool. So many people, so many characters are in there.
Ian,
James Gunn's in there. Lambshank is James Gunn.
No, Lambshank is that little
the deformed.
The deformed thing that comes out of the that was heartbreaking.
James Gunn.
Super dark.
Yeah, James Gunn.
What's the name of that little fuzzy?
Wrong.
What's the name of that little fuzzy thing that Adam Warlock's running around with? That I have to get.
What was his name? Of. Yeah, he's
is that in the comics? That little guy? Because I guess I got to get a stuffed animal version of that thing now.
I didn't recognize that alien from the comics though. But how awesome was Cosmo? For me, every time the fact that Cosmo was so neurotic about the bad dog thing was hysterical because it's like he said he was a bad dog and he can't get over that.
Can't accept that.
We saw Howard the Duck again so much. Yep, it's great.
We saw Howard the Duck again. That was cool. And I like the Kraglin storyline where Kraglin can't control the whistle, and then by the end of it, Kraglin sees his brother, and it was great to see that cameo. And he sees his brother, and he understands how to do this, and his brother believes in him, and that's what he needed. And then Sean just rocks out with that thing. That was awesome.
Yeah. It's not his brother. It was his fellow Ravager. It was like
his fellow Ravager, but you get it. Yeah. You get it. I mean, he definitely took a part of him and put it into his skull. Where could we see these next Guardians team? I don't think we're going to get a Guardians Volume 4.
I mean, listen, I would have said something like the Marvels, but I think it's pretty clear we won't see them there coming so soon. But maybe, it would be super cool if they did do that. It's coming so soon after, but they could have shot it at the same time. So to me, that'd be seriously cool. Because that's the place where I would expect to see them, right?
Another cosmic story,
yeah. I don't think it's plans for Guardians 4, but the nice thing about this is they have room and time. If they want to develop a Guardians 4, honestly, I think the box office it's doing better than I initially expected, but not as good as they'd hoped. But I hate all the articles about superhero fatigue. But I have to say that those last couple of movies not being as good did hurt the brand. Let's not kid ourselves,
I agree. This is a team that can definitely pop up in an Avengers film. I think anybody's fair game in an Avengers film. The way that they do those Avengers movies. There's a team that's out there in the spaceways, Ian, that we're not talking about. They are established in the MCU. Who knows if they're going to come back? I'm talking about the Eternals. The Eternals ever coming back? Or we're going to see pieces of them come back. Are we going to see Eternals in other movies?
They're definitely going to carry on those storylines somewhere. From what I hear, they're going to do another Eternals. That's what I hear. Now, I know we all say, God, first one was bad, and I think this is risky because, I think that, a different filmmaker, different intention, is there potential for a good movie? Sure, but they're not bulletproof anymore, So what are the expectations of that movie? Even great word of mouth. Honestly, I want to see what happens with this movie because I think this movie didn't open where they wanted to, but I think the word of mouth is going to be great. Does this movie end up having legs where it still it did a lot less money than the second Guardians did, but does its whole run end up making up for that because the word of mouth I think the word of mouth is great, right?
Yeah.
Not just my opinion.
I know. I love this movie.
It's really, really great word of mouth. Like my wife who really liked the Guardians movies, watched the Christmas special, like she didn't even care. I took my stepson, came with us, but he and I both came back. It's like, you want to see this movie, like I'm going to get her in the theater and see it. And frankly, I mean, I'm going to go again probably to get her to see it, and I'm perfectly good with going and seeing that again. I don't know. We haven't discussed it yet.
I just invited myself to your date.
I noticed that. The trick is figuring out the timing for it.
I watched Dungeons and Dragons again, another similar movie that was in the Guardians vein, and
that was fun.
It was great.
I really enjoyed that movie.
Yeah. All right, Ian, you're clacketing, trying to get back to work. I see you. I hear you. What are your final thoughts on this Guardians 3? Anything we did not cover?
What else haven't we talked about here? So I mentioned before, I said, I think where they leave Peter Quill, I like that. I think it's interesting. Presumably he has his weaponry with him, once again, whereas the damn helmet and rocket boots, I would hope he has those with him, because otherwise he's just a regular human. But, so is
he though? He survived the vacuumous. Heidi turned to me and she said, "How did he survive the vacuumous space?" And I said, "Well, Ego's his father."
Yeah, he was half celestial, but supposedly all those abilities were burned out.
Okay, and that's what you saw in that last
those
sequence.
Abilities are burned out.
Okay, because his face went right back in.
At the end of Guardians 2, we were led to believe that those abilities are burned out. Do we know for sure now? But that's what we were led to believe, So, because the idea that he wasn't completely incinerated, even with them all helping him in the first Guardians, is because he was part celestial, right? So, so there's that question. And by the way, in fairness, they reference Celestials as not just being, the Celestials that are the judges of, in the Eternals, as even that Ego was one. So, again, great place where he could turn up is if they do something with the Eternals, and, I mean, a lot of this stuff cross-pollinates. So, the fact that we got Pip the Troll there, we got Star Fox, there's a lot of places these characters can pop up,
Well, we're going to have to wait to find out.
Yeah, there was a rumor that we were going to get Black Knight and Blade. But
the Blade
I heard that Blade was actually taken. Well, it's shut down right now. But then supposedly I heard the Blade movie was taking place in the 50s, so it probably wouldn't be this Black Knight.
Sure.
So,
We have a Facebook user who says, what? The only way I would consider watching Eternals 2, he called it Externals, Eternals 2 in the theater is if Rocket and the New Guardians were in the trailer. You know what? I think that would be a smart move.
Externals is a movie I want to see.
Who are they? Oh, yeah. The Externals of that X book?
Right after X-Force. Yeah.
So,
the Eternals are the immortal mutants.
Yeah. I think the Eternals 2, I don't see that. I think that would be a super smart move is to have Marvel cross-pollinate Eternals movie with some of these cosmic characters, whether it's be the Captain Marvel stuff or some of the Guardian cast-offs. I think that'd be great.
Here's the thing is I think I was surprised that when you have a movie that did $1 billion, even though it wasn't that good in the first Captain Marvel, and to make a decision to change the name of the sequel from Captain Marvel 2 to the Marvels. But it does speak to what the story is, and it's not just about her, right? It's about Ms. Marvel also. It's about Photon also. To me, as bad as Eternals was, but if you want to carry over some of those ideas, you do something like that, where you name it something different.
Sure.
The trick is, in doing that, Marvel's pretty much they did something that definitely would have worked a few years ago, and I'm not sure it works anymore. And we'll see what the box office of the Marvels does, which is they were the brand. They were the franchise. Marvel itself is now the franchise in doing that with the Marvels versus it being a Captain Marvel franchise.
Yeah.
So that's the trick. The trick is there a storyline that you do that incorporates what you set up in Eternals and some other concepts? Maybe it's Star-Lord, maybe it's these Guardians. There are some other cosmic concepts you can do. I have a friend of mine that says to me a lot, like, they want the Annihilation Wave. For
you gotta do
me,
Fantastic Four for that.
I don't think you do Annihilus before you do the Fantastic Four. But
that's right.
Give me Fantastic Four. Great. Now we're doing cosmic. Give me Galactus. Give me the Silver Surfer. There's a lot of ideas here, right? I mean, Galactus flowing out of what you already saw in the Celestials, the idea of Galactus coming to Earth to eat that Celestial, the Celestial inside, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
So, and I think anything you're doing with that, I think that's where you might see these Guardians again.
Or the Eternals.
The Eternals, certainly. Peter Quill, sure. But it was interesting to me that they definitively made that statement at the end of this movie, that Star-Lord will return, because that means they already know where they're putting him. Well, they know even if we don't.
Let me wrap up by saying I know we're going to return. It's going to be Spider-Verse. We're watching Spider-Verse. And we also have The Flash. And as far as Marvel MCU goes, we have Secret Invasion. And Secret Invasion is going to lead right into Marvels because Fury. It's going to be awesome.
Is Secret Invasion August?
I thought it was July, but it could be August. Yeah.
Might be July.
Mm-hmm. Unless we're going to talk about Transformers Beast Wars or Fast X. Strap yourselves in for that ride.
It's all about family.
It's all about family. Well, brother, you are a part of my family. And I loved seeing this movie with you. Sorry I had to jet right after, but I loved the movie and I want to see it again. I don't necessarily need to see it again with you and your wife, though. I can go see it again with somebody else. I'm not going to sit. I'll sit between you guys. Maybe not. Maybe not.
Wife to go, but
yeah. All right, Ian. The road to Comic-Con is real, man. I submitted a panel. We did some I'm planning stuff for the booth. We're inviting friends to come be a part of it. Geekscape, if you have plans to be in San Diego for Comic-Con, come visit us.
I wonder how this writer strike is going to affect Comic-Con.
I think writers are going to go there not to promote each other's shows or their shows, so their employers' stuff. I think they're going to go to promote their projects, their own stuff.
Well, it gets tricky because do they want to do panels where they're promoting things for studios?
I've submitted to moderate a panel with creatives who all work for studios and have projects. Different.
Yeah,
and I'm okay with them.
Your panel's about those creators themselves. It's not pushed. It's not promoting, something that's been made that benefits the studio. So that's different.
Right. And I wonder what, the actors are supposedly, in support of the WGA. So we'll see. But
by the way, if the actors are striking, because the actor deal hits right around Comic-Con, right? That contract. So
I heard from somebody that the WGA would probably be settled by Comic-Con.
I so hope you're right. I don't know where you heard that from.
Somebody told me mid-July is what they think. I think they think that they can afford to hold out until mid-July, and then mid-July the studios are going to be like, okay, fine.
June 20th is when the DGA would strike also. And we don't need to make this podcast about this, but
sure.
But I think it's unlikely it settles before then. But I think that when the studios see the solidarity of the director's strike as well, I think that July could be a time. I don't think there's any way it settles before then.
Right. And the new Guardians team can't step in for that?
I know. I mean,
but that's not the next time we're going to see them.
Right? I don't think so.
Okay. I don't think so. All right. Geekscape, if you enjoyed this conversation, learned a lot from Ian about the origins of some of these characters and some of the comic book stuff, share it with your friends. Hit the share button on whatever podcatcher you're listening to, and send it over and be like, hey, these guys, they talk comics and Ian knows his stuff. And of course, subscribe, write us those 5-star reviews. That really gives us some great visibility on the different podcast apps, and just share it with your friends. I've got some cool guests coming up on Geekscape that are scheduled, and I go through these waves where I don't have people scheduled, and I have too many people scheduled, and I try and thin it out, but I like talking about their stuff live. So that's just the way it is. Geekscape, love you. Ian, thank you, and we'll talk to you again very soon. Peace, everybody.